As I continue to reiterate every day, and I do this every day because I really want you to be impressed by the fact that if you read your Bible and you read it, and by reading it, I don't mean just that you happen to open it up and just read the stuff in there. We've made this clear. We're talking about if you are reading it, that is, you're trying to discern what does it mean. You're making sense of it. You're paying attention to things. If you're reading it in a normal, plain manner, you're going to recognize that there are things that are different. You're going to say, over here it said this, and over here it says this, and which one is it? And you're going to have to exercise some discernment. And you're going to find out that there's some things in the Bible that are specifically for how you and I live. And there's some things in the Bible that are for how people lived at other times, such as the people of Israel to the time of the cross, or the people that will live in the kingdom in the future. And you and I are to be living today by grace. But many Christians, even though we cite that, do not understand exactly what that means. I'm Pastor Tim Holscher, and we're talking about reading your Bible, and more particularly right now, the practice of discerning what it means to live by the grace of God. And if we think about this and work on this, one of the things that we're going to find as a challenge to this is us resorting to law. Maybe the Mosaic Law, the Ten Commandments. It may be a law that we create. It may be a religious law that our church or religious organization has imposed on us. But it's a law of some sort. And Paul said that there was a time in his life, verse 9 of Romans 7, that I was once alive apart from the law. But when the commandment came, sin became alive and I died. Now, this expression, as we said in the last video, sin became alive, is literally that the sin came back to life. It came to a life again. It was renewed to life, meaning the sin nature had been alive, but it, on a practical level, was dead because Paul was living a life apart from law. When did Paul do that as a believer? He was probably raised under the rigors of the law from the time that that kid was sitting on the floor wherever his parents were in Tarsus. And they were already drilling in him. They were Pharisees. He says, I was a Pharisee from Pharisees, meaning he would have been raised under those very strict laws from an early start. There was no time in his life that he was alive apart from law, except at the moment that he would have believed the gospel and for a period of time following that. We come to verse 10, and he says, this commandment which was to result in life, or was actually unto life, and it was unto life in the sense that God says, you do this. We looked at these in these studies on reading the Bible, that do this and live. But he's not talking about live eternally. He was talking about you do these and you don't die. So those things that were unto life, they proved to result in death. They were bringing out that part of Paul that was dead. He says, for sin taking an opportunity through the commandment, it deceived me. How did it deceive him? In fact, it's not just deceive, it really deceived him. You can do this, Paul. This is a good way to live. You can Christianize now this law that you've lived under. And you can do this stuff. And it deceived it, and through it killed me. And then he has these statements here. And we've looked at these in these studies when we were looking at how it looked to live under the law. But he says, so then the law is holy. That is, it was set apart. That's what it was. It set Israel apart from the things that were common. It set them apart from the other nations. So it was holy. And the commandment likewise, because the law was made up of commands, is holy and it was righteous. It never told them to do bad stuff. It told them righteous stuff. And it was good. It actually was there to look out for their benefit. But there's a problem. Verse 13, therefore, did that which is good become a cause of death for me? May it never be. Rather, he says it was the sin nature in order that it might be shown to be sin. In other words, the very purpose that God gave the law to Israel was to demonstrate to them that all of us are sinners. Paul says that in Romans chapter 3. He gave it to that one nation, Israel, to prove to the entire world, to shut our mouths and prove that we're all sinners. We can stand there and make excuses for ourselves all day, but the law was given to show we're sinners. Now, once you know you're a sinner, do you just need to keep going back and reminding yourself again and again? I don't think so, because you know what? You're going to sin just fine. And what you're going to need is something that's going to provide freedom. And Paul's demonstrating it's not the law. May it never be. Rather, it was sin, in order that it might be shown to be sin by working, this word affecting is by working out death through that which is good, so that through the commandment, sin would become utterly sinful. And when he's talking about sinner, he's talking about, again, the sin nature, because there's sin with a definite article in the Greek. Verse 14, for we know that the law is spiritual. People go, oh, it's spiritual. You know what that meant? It appealed to your spirit. It didn't appeal to your soul. To me, the best example is that one of the commands in the law said, thou shalt not commit adultery. So you are not to go and have a sexual relationship with another woman that's married to another man. And I don't think there was probably ever a man that ever cheated on his wife or made another woman cheat on her husband in whatever the situation. I don't think there's ever a situation in which that happened, in which the man said, these are the rational reasons that I should proceed with this extramarital affair. No. It's the way he feels. And his feel, he wants this. He wants this relationship. And it's a feeling. And it's driven by urges, not spiritual. So that's what he's saying. The law appears to your spirit. You stop and think about, what are the consequences if you do this? We looked at this when we were looking at the law in these studies, that most of the commands of the law, many of the commands of the law, resulted in the death penalty. In fact, the Apostle Paul called the law a ministry of death in 2 Corinthians 3. So he says, the law is spiritual, but my problem is I'm one from flesh. I'm sold in bondage under the sin nature. I'm stuck with this stupid sin nature right now, and it drives me nuts. It's not driving unsaved people nuts. It drives believers nuts because they know that there's something better, something that they've even tasted as part of their salvation usually early on. And then we deviate after the law. Paul says, verse 15, for what I am doing, I don't know. For I am not practicing what I would like, but I'm doing the very thing I hate. What? A lot of people come to Paul and they say, Paul, you're crazy. But the thing is, how many Christians, how many of you listening to this can say, yeah, you know exactly what Paul's talking about? That there's things you go, I don't want to do that. That's not the way I want to live. God's given me something better. So why am I doing these things? It drives me nuts. That's what Paul's frustrated with. But the problem is he's turned to the law, and the law just keeps saying, don't you want to do that? Don't you want to do that? Don't you want to do that? Why does the law do that? Because it was designed to call our attention to things that we shouldn't do. And by calling our attention, your sin nature sits up and goes, well, I'd like to do that. Verse 16, but if I do the very thing that I do not want to do, then I agree with the law, confessing that it is good. Why? How is it good? It's because it's doing exactly what it's showing you. It's showing you that you have this sinful nature. It's exactly, Paul says it back in chapter 3, and he's telling us again here. And I don't know why we can't read it for that. We try to make the law something else. We try to make it the cure, not the diagnostic tool. If you don't know what I mean by that, let's say that a person has a disease in their body and they put a dye in there, and the dye goes to certain parts, and then they take an image of it with some scanner, and that dye and the scanner show the images there. We found it. Now let's just do more dye and more imaging. No, because that's not how you cure it. You're going to go and you're going to use the medical cure to attack that thing. And that's what Paul's saying is, you're trying to take the diagnostic tool, the law, and make it the thing that's going to fix the sin problem. It wasn't designed to do that. Verse 17. So now no longer am I the one doing it, but literally the sin, referring to the sin nature which dwells in me. For I know that nothing good dwells in me. What? Well, that is in my flesh. For to desire, that's present. But the doing, working it out, the good thing, that's not there. For the good that I want to do, I don't do it. But I practice the very evil, the very thing that's not the way it's supposed to do, that's not the way it's supposed to be, that I do not want. But if I'm doing the very thing I do not want, I am no longer the one doing it. But again, repeats it again if we didn't catch it the first time, but it is the sin nature which dwells in me. And so Paul finds this principle that he can have the desire, can be present in him, but there's still this evil while he's wanting this other thing. And with regard to the law of God, and I don't think this is the law of Moses, this is the law of God. This is God's principle of how we can operate. He says, in the inner man, I can appreciate that. But there's a different law, and that's this law that involves my sinful nature that's warring against the law of my mind. And it leaves Paul frustrated, so that Paul says something that millions upon millions of Christians have said, maybe not vocally, but in their hearts, wretched man that I am, who will set me free from the body of this death? They're saying, God, I know this isn't the way you want me to be, and I know I don't have to be like this, so why do I keep doing this? I'm miserable. I'm wretched. Who's going to rescue me? And Paul is going to give us the answer to that rescue in the next, well, what we know is the next chapter. It was just the next part of the letter when Paul wrote it. But again, if you're not catching this as I'm going through this, what Paul's saying is the law isn't the solution. It's only a tool that God gave to Israel as a diagnostic to prove to them that they're sinners, and to prove that through them, the whole world, that we're all sinners. And Paul, in his Christian life, it proved to him not only that he's a sinner, but he has a sin nature dwelling in him. That's, as a Christian, the lesson that Paul learned when he tried to live by the law. And that is not God's way of life for the Christian who is under grace. God has a better way of life for us. And we're going to see where Paul goes with that in our next study. So stick around. As always, have a good day in the Lord, and thank you for joining me.